March 1944. A Marine crouches alone in tangled jungle, sweat dripping off his nose, staring through a cheap hunting scope at a tree 200 yards away. He can see the silhouette now. A Japanese sniper, camouflaged, rifle resting on a branch, waiting to kill. The Marine's finger tightens on the trigger. His sergeant told him 3 days ago he was suicidal. His platoon called him crazy. Command said his weapon was unauthorized. None of them are here now. Just him, the scope, and the man in the tree who doesn't know he's about to die. Robert Leki pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the humid air. The figure in the tree jerked, tumbled, and dropped 30 feet into the undergrowth with a muffled crash. Leki didn't move. He stayed frozen, breathing shallow, eyes still pressed to the scope, scanning for movement. Japanese snipers worked in pairs. Where there was one, there was always another. 60 seconds passed. Then 2 minutes. Nothing moved. Leki exhaled slowly, pulled back from his position, and melted into jungle without a sound. That was his 9th kill in 2 weeks. He had 15 more to go. Bougainville Island, part of the Solomon Islands chain in the South Pacific, was never supposed to be a major battleground. It was a bypass target, a place to neutralize Japanese air bases, establish American positions, and move on. But the Japanese didn't see it that way. They dug in, they fortified, and they sent their best snipers into the jungle to bleed the Americans slowly, one shot at a time. By early 1944, U.S. Marines on Bougainville were pinned down not by artillery or banzai charges, but by invisible killers. Japanese snipers operated with brutal efficiency. They climbed into the canopy, strapped themselves to branches, and waited for days. They dug spider holes in jungle floor, covered them with foliage, and fired through narrow slits. They hid in abandoned bunkers, in ravines, behind rotting logs. They shot medics first, then officers, then radio men, then anyone who moved. The Marines couldn't advance. Patrols became suicide missions. Supply lines turned into shooting galleries. Men stopped standing upright. They crawled. They whispered. They flinched at every rustling leaf. The jungle belonged to the enemy, and the enemy was invisible. And into this nightmare walked Private First Class Robert Leki, a 22-year-old Marine from Pennsylvania, carrying a rifle that wasn't supposed to exist. Leki wasn't a trained sniper. The Marine Corps didn't have trained snipers in 1944, not officially. There was no sniper school, no doctrine, no specialized equipment. Marksmanship was valued, sure, but the idea of a lone marksman hunting enemy shooters was seen as impractical, even reckless. Sniping was something the enemy did. Americans fought with firepower, aggression, and maneuver. That was the doctrine. But doctrine doesn't stop bullets. And Robert Leki had grown up stopping things that moved. He was raised in rural Pennsylvania, hunting deer and groundhogs with his father from age 10. He learned patience in the woods, how to move without sound, how to read wind, how to wait for the perfect shot. He learned that killing wasn't about courage or aggression. It was about stillness, calculation, and timing. By the time he enlisted in 1942, he could hit a moving target at 300 yards with iron sights. When he shipped out to the Pacific, he brought something with him that would change everything. A commercial hunting scope he'd ordered from a Sears catalog before deployment. It was a Weaver 330, a civilian telescopic sight, designed for deer hunters. It magnified the target 2.5 times, had simple crosshairs, and cost about $12. It wasn't military issue. It wasn't ruggedized. It wasn't authorized. Leki didn't care. He mounted it on his M1903 Springfield rifle using improvised rings he'd traded for with a machinist aboard the transport ship. When he arrived on Bougainville and showed up to his unit with a scope rifle, the reaction was instant and brutal. "What the hell is that?" his squad leader asked. "Scope," Leki said. "I can see that." "Where'd you get it?" "Mail order." "Jesus Christ. You can't use that in combat." "Why not?" "Because it's not approved. Because it'll break the first time you drop it. Because you'll get yourself killed trying to play sniper while the rest of us are trying to stay alive." Leki didn't argue. He just nodded and kept the rifle. For the first 2 weeks on Bougainville, he didn't use it. He patrolled like everyone else, kept his head down, carried ammunition, dug foxholes. But every day, more Marines died. A lance corporal took a round to the neck while filling his canteen. A radio man was shot through the forehead while calling in coordinates. A lieutenant was killed stepping out of his tent at dawn. The Marines tried everything. They fired blindly into the canopy. They called in mortar strikes on suspected sniper positions. They sent out search and destroy patrols that returned with nothing but exhaustion and fear. The Japanese snipers were ghosts. By the time you saw one, you were already dead. And then one morning, Robert Leki walked into his company commander's tent and said, "Let me go after them." The captain looked up from his maps. "After who?" "The snipers." The captain stared at him. "You want to hunt Japanese snipers?" "Alone? In the jungle?" "Yes, sir." "With that mail-order scope?" "Yes, sir." The captain rubbed his face. He was exhausted. They all were. He looked at Leki, a quiet, unremarkable PFC who barely spoke in formation, who had no reputation, no record of heroics, nothing that suggested he was anything other than another rifleman trying to survive. "You know what happened to the last guy who tried that?" the captain asked. "No, sir. He got shot in the face 10 minutes after leaving camp." Leki nodded. "I won't." The captain sighed. "Why do you think you can do this?" "Because I've done it before," Leki said. "Not people, animals. But the principle's the same. You find where they hide. You figure out their pattern. You wait, and you shoot first." The captain studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "If you get killed, it's on you. If you don't come back, we're not sending a patrol to find you." "Understood." "Understood. And if you do this, you do it alone. I'm not losing more men on a hunting trip." "That's fine." The captain waved him off. "Go. And don't get anyone else killed trying to be a hero." Leki left the tent, checked his rifle, filled his canteen, and walked into the jungle. The first rule of counter-sniping is simple. Don't think like a soldier. Think like a hunter. Leki didn't patrol. He didn't sweep. He didn't move in straight lines or follow trails. He moved the way he'd moved in Pennsylvania forests, slow, quiet, always checking his flanks, always watching the high ground and the shadows. He didn't look for snipers. He looked for signs of snipers. Broken branches at odd heights, rope marks on tree trunks, disturbed soil near thick brush, shell casings half buried in leaves, footprints that didn't match Marine-issue boots, food wrappers, cigarette ash, urine stains, blood. The Japanese snipers were skilled, but they were still human. They left traces, and Leki knew how to read them. On his first solo patrol, he found a sniper nest in a banyan tree 400 yards from the Marine perimeter. The nest was empty, but had been used recently. There were grooves in the bark where a rifle had rested, a small platform made of lash bamboo, a scrap of camouflage netting. Leki studied the position, noted the angle, and moved on. The next day, he found another nest, and another. He began mapping them in his head, connecting them into a network. The Japanese weren't randomly positioned. They were coordinated. They covered overlapping fields of fire. They communicated with hand signals and mirror flashes. They rotated positions every few days to avoid detection. Leki didn't report any of this. He just kept moving. On the fourth day, he saw his first target. It was late afternoon. The light was fading. Leki was crouched in a thicket of ferns 250 yards from a suspected sniper zone. He'd been there for 3 hours, unmoving, watching a cluster of trees near a ridgeline. Most men would have given up, but Leki had once waited 6 hours in a Pennsylvania tree stand for a single buck. Patience was his weapon. And then he saw it, a flicker of movement in the canopy, a shadow shifting, a branch swaying slightly against the wind. He raised his rifle, pressed his eye to the scope, and scanned the treetops. It took another 10 minutes, but eventually he saw him, a Japanese sniper, perched on a thick branch, partially obscured by foliage, rifle aimed toward the Marine perimeter. Leki controlled his breathing. He adjusted for distance, wind, and elevation. He placed the crosshairs on the sniper's torso, center mass, just like deer, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The sniper convulsed and fell. Leki didn't celebrate. He reloaded, scanned for a partner, found nothing, and disappeared back into the jungle. That night, Japanese return fire rattled the Marine lines, but it was scattered, disorganized. One overwatch position had gone dark, and the enemy didn't know why. Leki didn't tell anyone. He just went out again the next morning. Over the following week, he killed 3 more snipers. Each time, he used the same method. Locate, wait, shoot, vanish. He never stayed in one position long. He never followed a pattern. He never took risky shots. If he wasn't certain, he didn't fire. And slowly, the battlefield began to change. Marine patrols started reporting fewer sniper contacts. Supply runs made it through without taking fire. Officers stopped dying in their command posts. The invisible enemy was becoming visible, or rather, it was disappearing. But still no one knew why. Then, 2 weeks into his solo campaign, Leki's squad leader found him cleaning his rifle outside his tent. "Leki." He looked up. "Captain wants to see you." Leki stood, grabbed his rifle, and walked to the command tent. Inside, the captain was standing over a map with 2 other officers. They all looked at him when he entered. "PFC Leki," the captain said. "How many?" "Sir, how many have you killed?" Leki hesitated. 9 confirmed, sir. Maybe 2 more, but I couldn't verify. The tent went silent. One of the officers, a major, stepped forward. "You've killed 9 enemy snipers in 2 weeks?" "Yes, sir." "Alone?" "Yes, sir." With that, the major pointed at the scoped Springfield. "Yes, sir." The major looked at the captain. The captain looked back at Leki. "Why didn't you report this?" The captain asked. "You told me not to get anyone else killed." "Sir, I didn't think it needed reporting until it was done." "Done," the major said. "You think this is done?" "No, sir. There's more of them out there." The major shook his head slowly, somewhere between disbelief and respect. "What's your method?" Leki explained. He described his tracking, his positioning, his patience. He explained how the Japanese snipers moved in pairs, how they used specific trees and ridgelines, how they rotated hides every 2 to 4 days. He explained how he didn't hunt them where they shot from. He hunted them where they moved between positions. The officers listened without interrupting. When he finished, the major said, "Can you teach this?" "Maybe," Leki said, "but it takes time, and most men don't have the patience for it." "Then keep doing it," the captain said. "Whatever you need. Ammunition, rations, time. You've got it." "I don't need much, sir. Just let me work." "Done." Leki nodded and left. From that moment on, he wasn't a regular rifleman anymore. He was a ghost in the jungle, a hunter no one talked about, a Marine with no official role and no paperwork, whose only job was to kill the unkillable. And he did. Over the next month, Robert Leki killed 15 more Japanese snipers. He learned their rhythms. He memorized their favorite hides. He began to predict where they'd set up based on Marine movements and time of day. He started thinking like them. Where would I go if I wanted to kill Marines today? Some kills were easy. A sniper too confident in his camouflage, sitting motionless for hours, never expecting to be seen. 1 shot, 1 death. Some were hard. A particularly skilled enemy marksman who changed positions every hour, who used decoys, who set traps. Leki tracked him for 4 days before finally catching him during a shift between trees. That shot was 320 yards, through jungle haze with crosswind. The bullet took the man in the chest as he climbed. And some were brutal. One afternoon, Leki found a Japanese sniper nest in a collapsed bunker. The sniper was inside, concealed behind sandbags, with a narrow firing slit aimed at a trail Marines use daily. Leki couldn't get a clean angle, so he waited. 6 hours later, the sniper emerged to relieve himself. Leki shot him in the back. There was no honor in it, no fairness, just necessity, where it had taught him something hunting never did. Mercy was a luxury the dead couldn't afford. By late April 1944, Japanese sniper activity on Bougainville had dropped by more than 60% in Leki's operational zone. Marines moved freely again. Casualty rates fell. Morale improved, but almost no one knew why. Leki's actions were never officially recorded. There were no commendations, no after-action reports, no mentions in dispatches. His captain kept informal notes, but those notes were lost when the company rotated off the island in May. The major who questioned him was transferred to another unit and never followed up. The scoped rifle Leki used, the unauthorized mail-order Weaver scope that had killed 24 enemy snipers, was eventually confiscated by a logistics officer who said it violated equipment regulations. Leki never got it back. He finished his deployment, survived the war, and went home to Pennsylvania. He worked in a steel mill, married, raised children, and almost never spoke about what he'd done on Bougainville. When asked once by a local reporter in the 1970s if he'd seen combat, he said, "Yeah, did some shooting. Nothing special. But it was special." Robert Leki proved something the Marine Corps wouldn't officially recognize for years. That patience could kill faster than firepower. That one man with the right tools and the right mindset could change the outcome of battle. That doctrine mattered less than results. He proved that being called crazy, suicidal, useless didn't mean you were wrong. It just meant you were ahead of your time. The lessons from Bougainville didn't die with Leki's anonymity. Within 2 years, the Marine Corps began developing its first formal sniper program. Scoped rifles became standard issue for designated marksmen. Counter-sniper tactics, track, wait, shoot, became doctrine. But none of it was credited to Robert Leki. His name appeared in no manuals. His methods were discovered independently. His story faded into the vast, unwritten history of men who did extraordinary things and were forgotten because no one thought to write them down. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not every hero gets a medal. Not every battle is recorded. Not every weapon that saves lives is approved by a committee. Sometimes, the most important victories are the ones no one knows about. Sometimes, the man everyone calls useless is the only one who knows what needs to be done. And sometimes, all it takes to change a war is one Marine, one rifle, one cheap scope, and the willingness to walk alone into the jungle and prove that results matter more than permission. Robert Leki didn't ask for recognition. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't need doctrine to tell him what was right. He just did the job. And 24 enemy snipers never came home because of it. In the years after the war, the Marine Corps studied what had worked on Bougainville. They analyzed casualty patterns, reviewed patrol reports, and tried to understand why sniper losses had spiked so suddenly in one sector during spring 1944. They never found Leki's name in the reports, but they found the results. And the results spoke clearly. Someone had systematically dismantled an entire Japanese sniper network, alone, with no support, using methods that defied every tactical assumption of the time. So they built those methods into training. They created sniper schools. They issued scope rifles. They taught Marines to hunt, to wait, to think like predators instead of soldiers. And they never knew they were teaching Robert Leki's war. That's the strange cruelty of history. The men who change it often vanish from it, but the change remains. Today, Marine Scout snipers are among the most elite and respected units in the U.S. military. They train for months. They study ballistics, fieldcraft, camouflage, observation. They learn patience, discipline, and the cold mathematics of long-range killing. They learn, in other words, to be Robert Leki, and none of them know his name. But here's what they do know, whether they realize it or not. That sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the biggest gun or the latest technology. It's the man who refuses to quit when everyone tells him he's wrong. It's the hunter who goes into the jungle alone because no one else will. It's the Marine with a mail-order scope and the audacity to believe that one person in the right place, with the right patience, can kill fear itself. That's what Robert Leki did on Bougainville. He didn't just kill snipers. He killed the idea that Marines had to be victims in the jungle. He killed the doctrine that said aggression was the only answer. He killed the fear that had paralyzed his unit for weeks. And he did it without permission, without recognition, and without regret. Because results don't need approval. They just need to work. And has worked 24 times. The jungle on Bougainville wasn't like the forests of Pennsylvania. It was darker, denser, louder. The canopy overhead blocked out the sky, turning midday into twilight. Vines hung like nooses. Roots twisted across the ground like tripwires. The air was thick, wet, hard to breathe. Everything smelled like rot and mud and something sweet that Leki couldn't name and didn't want, and it was never silent. Insects screamed. Birds shrieked. Branches cracked in the distance for no reason. The jungle was alive in a way that made you feel watched, even when you were alone, especially when you were alone. Leki learned quickly that silence wasn't the absence of sound. It was the wrong kind of sound. A bird going quiet, insects stopping, the wind shifting and carrying a smell that didn't belong, tobacco, sweat, gun oil. That's when you knew. On his 6th day hunting alone, Leki crouched in a gully near a stream and smelled cigarette smoke. It was faint, almost gone, but it was there. He froze, controlled his breathing, and scanned the area. The stream ran through a narrow ravine with steep sides. Thick foliage lined both banks. Overhead, the canopy was broken in a few places, letting in shafts of light. Leki studied those light shafts. Snipers liked them. They provided contrast, made targets easier to see. But they also created shadows, and shadows were where you hid. He moved slowly along the bank, rifle ready, eyes sweeping left and right. 50 yards upstream, he saw it. A spider hole, perfectly concealed under a fallen log and a mat of ferns. The hole was angled toward the trail that Marines used to move between positions. Leki stopped. The hole was empty. That meant the sniper was close. He backed away quietly, circled wide, and climbed a low ridge that overlooked the stream. He found a position behind a termite mound, settled in and waited. 2 hours passed, then 3. The light began to fade. Leki's legs cramped. His back ached. Mosquitoes bit his neck and hands. He didn't move. And then, just before dusk, a figure appeared. The Japanese sniper emerged from the jungle on the opposite side of the stream, moving carefully, rifle slung over his shoulder. He was young, maybe 20, with a thin face and a camouflage cape made of woven grass. He reached the spider hole, crouched down, and began checking his position, adjusting the ferns, clearing his sight line, preparing for the next day's hunt. Leki watched him through the scope. The man was calm, methodical, professional. He wasn't cruel or savage. He was just a soldier doing his job. A good soldier. Leki centered the crosshairs on his back and fired. The sniper collapsed forward into the hole, without a sound. Leki stayed in position for another 30 minutes, watching for a reaction, a partner, anything. Nothing came. Eventually, he stood, stretched his stiff legs, and moved back into the jungle. That night, he lay in his tent and thought about the man he'd killed. He wondered if the sniper had a family, if he'd been conscripted or volunteered, if he'd been scared or confident, if he'd known, in that last second before the bullet hit, that he was about to die. Leki didn't feel guilt. He felt something else, a kind of tired clarity. This was what war was. Not speeches or flags or glory. Just men killing men in the mud, far from home, for reasons most of them didn't fully understand. And if he didn't do it, someone else would die instead. That was the trade. That was the math. So he did it, again, and again, and again, by his 15th kill. Leki had developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn. Eat cold rations. Check rifle and ammunition. Move into the jungle. Hunt until dusk. Return to camp. Sleep. Repeat. He stopped talking to the other Marines. Not out of arrogance or trauma, just practicality. They didn't understand what he was doing, and he didn't have the energy to explain. They thought he was crazy. Maybe he was, but crazy worked. The Marines in his company started calling him the Ghost, not because he was stealthy, though he was, but because he seemed unreal. He'd disappear for days, come back without a word, and then patrols would report that sniper fire had stopped in a specific sector. No one saw him work. No one knew his methods. He was just there, and then snipers weren't. Some men respected it. Others resented it. A few were openly hostile. One corporal confronted him outside the mess tent. "You think you're special?" the corporal said. Walking around like you're some kind of hero? Leki looked at him. No. Then why do you do it? Because someone has to. We all do our part. I know. So stop acting like you're the only one fighting this war. Leki didn't respond. He just walked away. The corporal didn't understand, and Leki didn't blame him. Most men fought in groups. They had squad mates, buddies, people who shared the fear and the exhaustion. Leki fought alone. That changed things. It made you colder, harder. It made you realize that survival wasn't about courage. It was about mathematics. How many seconds can you stay still before your muscles cramp? How far can you shoot accurately in humid air? How long can you go without water before your hands start shaking? Those were the questions that mattered. Not bravery, not honor, just numbers. And Leki was very good with numbers. His most difficult kill came 3 weeks into his campaign. Intelligence reported a Japanese sniper operating near a supply route the Marines needed to keep open. The sniper had killed 5 men in 4 days, a radio man, 2 riflemen, a medic, and a lieutenant. Every kill was a headshot. Every kill was over 300 yards. Every kill was from a different position. This wasn't a regular sniper. This was an expert. Leki studied the kill zones. He mapped the angles. He realized the sniper was using a tactic called shoot and move. Fire once, then immediately relocate before anyone could return fire. It was effective but exhausting. The sniper had to carry his weapon, his ammunition, his camouflage, and move quickly through dense jungle without being seen. That meant he had to use specific routes, and routes could be predicted. Leki spent 2 days tracking those routes. He found bent grass, broken twigs, a depression in the soil where someone had knelt. He found a discarded rice ball wrapper. He found a tree with bark scraped off at shoulder height. The sniper had used it for cover, and then he found the pattern. The sniper was moving in a wide loop, hitting different sections of the supply route from different angles, then returning to a central hide to rest and reposition. The hide was somewhere in a dense grove of mahogany trees, about 600 yards from the trail. Leki couldn't see the hide, but he knew where it had to be. So he set a trap. He positioned himself on a ridgeline overlooking the grove, found a concealed spot behind a fallen tree, and waited. He didn't watch the grove. He watched the approaches. If the sniper was moving in a loop, he'd have to return eventually. And when he did, Leki would see him. He waited for 6 hours, then 8, then 10. The sun climbed, peaked, and began to fall. Leki's water ran out. His lips cracked. His vision blurred. But he didn't move. And then, just as the light turned golden, he saw movement. A figure, low and fast, moving through the undergrowth toward the mahogany grove. The figure stopped, scanned, moved again. Leki raised his rifle and tracked him through the scope. The sniper was good. He used cover perfectly, never exposing himself for more than a second. But Leki didn't need a second. He needed a mistake. And eventually, the sniper made one. He paused at the edge of the grove, just for a moment, to check his surroundings. In that moment, his head and shoulders were visible between 2 trees. Leki fired. The sniper dropped. Leki reloaded and waited. No movement, no partner, just stillness. He stayed in position until full dark, then moved carefully down to the grove. He found the body in the undergrowth, a Japanese soldier mid-30s, with a scoped Arisaka rifle and a weathered face. He'd been shot through the upper chest. Leki searched the body and found a notebook. Inside were sketches of the Marine supply route, range estimates, wind notes, and a list of 8 names. Probably targets. Maybe men he'd already killed. Leki burned the notebook, took the rifle as proof, and left the body for the jungle. That kill changed something in him. Not morally, tactically. He realized the best Japanese snipers weren't just skilled shooters. They were planners. They studied their targets. They kept records. They thought several moves ahead. And if Leki wanted to beat them, he had to do the same. So he started keeping his own notebook. He sketched maps of sniper zones. He noted wind patterns, light conditions, common hide locations. He recorded distances, angles, and sight lines. He wrote down the time of day when snipers were most active, dawn and dusk, when the light was tricky and Marines were tired. He began to think like them, not just as a hunter, but as a mind. Where would I position myself if I wanted to kill the most Marines with the least risk? What would I do if I knew someone was hunting me? How would I set a trap for a counter sniper? Those questions made him better. They also made him paranoid. He started checking his back trail obsessively. He varied his routes every day. He never used the same hide twice. He slept in different spots each night, sometimes in trees, sometimes in shallow scrapes under bushes, because he knew, eventually, the Japanese would figure out what he was doing, and they'd send someone after him. It happened on his 22nd kill. Leki was moving through a section of jungle he'd cleared 2 days earlier. He'd killed a sniper team there, 2 men in a double hide, and assumed the area was safe. He was wrong. Halfway through the sector, he heard a crack behind him. He dove sideways as a bullet smashed into a tree where his head had been. He hit the ground, rolled, and came up behind a log, rifle ready. Another shot. Bark exploded inches from his shoulder. Leki didn't return fire. He stayed low, breathing hard, tried to locate the shooter. The shots had come from behind and above, probably a tree, maybe 150 yards back. He'd been followed. The Japanese had sent a hunter for the hunter. Leki crawled along the log, putting distance between himself and his last position. He moved slowly, quietly, using every bit of cover. Another shot rang out, but it missed wide. The enemy sniper was guessing now. Leki reached a thicket of ferns and stopped. He couldn't see the sniper, but he didn't need to. He just needed to think. The sniper had fired 3 times. That meant he was confident, aggressive, probably young. Older snipers didn't waste ammunition. Leki made his decision. He took off his helmet, placed it on a stick, and raised it slowly above the ferns. A shot cracked out instantly. The helmet flew off the stick. Leki marked the muzzle flash. A tree, 40 feet up, 130 yards northeast. Now he knew. He moved wide, circling through dense undergrowth, keeping low. It took 15 minutes to get into position on the sniper's flank. He found a gap in the foliage, raised his rifle, and scanned the tree. There, a shadow on a branch, a rifle barrel pointing the wrong direction. Leki fired twice. The sniper fell. He didn't go check the body. He just left. That night, back in camp, his hands shook as he cleaned his rifle. Not from fear, from exhaustion, from the realization that he'd almost died because he'd gotten careless. He'd assumed, and assumption was the first step toward a bullet. He didn't assume again. His final 2 kills came in the same day. It was early May. The Marines were preparing to move off Bougainville, rotating in fresh units and consolidating positions. Leki knew his time was almost up. He also knew there was 1 more sniper pair operating near the airfield. They'd been hitting Marines from a ridge overlooking the runway, making resupply flights dangerous. Leki went out alone one last time. He found the ridge just after dawn and studied it from 400 yards away. The ridge was steep, rocky, covered in thin brush. 2 good hides, both elevated, both with clear fields of fire. He couldn't approach directly, so he waited for them to move. At midday, one of the snipers emerged from cover and began descending the ridge, probably heading back to resupply or reposition. Leki shot him as he climbed down. The second sniper reacted immediately, firing toward Leki's position. But Leki had already moved. He circled left, climbed a parallel ridge, and flanked the sniper from the side. The final shot was 280 yards, through scattered brush, into a man who never saw him coming. Leki stayed on the ridge for an hour, watching the bodies, making sure there were no more. Then he walked back to camp, turned in his rifle, and packed his gear. 3 days later, he was on a transport ship heading home. He never spoke about Bougainville. Not to his family, not to reporters, not to veterans groups. When asked, he said he'd been a rifleman. That was all. The notebook he'd kept, the maps, the notes, the sketches, he burned before leaving the island. The scoped rifle that had killed 24 men was confiscated and likely destroyed. The men he saved never knew he existed. And history moved on without him. But the lesson didn't. Robert Leki proved that one man with patience, skill, and refusal to quit could change the course of battle. He proved that doctrine was less important than results. He proved that being called crazy didn't mean you were wrong. It meant you saw something others couldn't. And most importantly, he proved that the most dangerous weapon in war isn't technology. It's belief. Belief that you can do what everyone says is impossible. Belief that results matter more than permission. Belief that one person in the right place at the right time can make all the difference. Robert Leki had that belief. And 24 enemy snipers died because of it. That's not just history. That's a lesson. If you want more forgotten stories like this, subscribe now, comment below, and tell me where you're watching from.